Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Since last we talked, news from the front lines have accelerated in development. Right now, Ukraine has finished penetrating the first defense line and they're already probing for weaknesses in the second one. You know, I don't like this map because it doesn't really represent accurately the front lines when we turn on these defensive positions because it's BS. But thankfully, Defmon came to the rescue. He analyzed important analysts' work on the podcast War of the on the Rocks, and he actually presented us with a visual aid map so we finally understand when are we talking about the first defense line, the second and the third. Here we can see very clearly how there are three lines for Ukraine to penetrate to get over these line defense positions. Important thing to look out for. First line, while it is not called the first line of defense, this is what is often referred to as the first line. Then what is the first line slash Surovikin line mentioned on this screenshot very often is referred as the second line of defense. And then there's what is called the second line of defense is actually called the third line of defense. So for that sake, I'm going to ignore what's on this picture because I am specifically referring to the first line of defense, to the fortifications that Russia is having in this yellowish area. The second line of defense is what we're having as a main defense line. And then the third line of defense is basically a fallback, prevent loss kind of a line. Because let's be honest, if Ukrainians reach this third line and start hugging Tokmak the same way that they're touching right now this second defense line or the first defense main line, Surovikin line, then it's pretty bad news for Russians because Tokmak is pretty much the goal of this operation. So let's dissect. Firstly, about the first line. We talked about that there are a lot of minefields. That one is being settled very nicely. What is not talked about as much is that there was a very significant network of defensive positions in that area as well. It was not just the defensive minefields, which there were a lot. It was also a setup with a lot of trenches, and tunnels connecting those trenches. There were dug in machine gunner positions. There were covered artillery positions. There was a lot. There were cameras that were set up and hidden in the bushes to see for advancement. There were thermal indicators, thermal optics set up in front besides the drones that the Russians have been launching. So it's a very extensive and complex line of defense that was actually there. And mines, while the biggest, was definitely not the only problem with that. And here I would like to stop and give a very special message from very special people. Guys, I have gotten the best partnership I could ever dream on this channel because the same guys that made my favorite Christmas sweater with HIMARS on it, they reached out to me with a proposal for a partnership. Saint Javelin is in the house, baby, and they have new collection. It's Crimean Beach Party collection, which is awesome. They have everything. They have hats, they have socks, they have the pins if you're into that kind of a thing. Yeah, come on, camera, show. Yes, pins are here. Guys, it's great. I am so happy to work with Saint Javelin. Saint Javelin is a company that is supporting Ukraine. They're donating money. As far as we know, they donated well above $1.3 million already to support Ukrainian armed forces, especially territorial defense units. And the new Crimean Beach Party collection is awesome. They are having a lot of cool stuff with this. My absolute favorite is the Novofedorovka Smokers Club t-shirt that I got, and it's amazing because Novofedorovka is a very famous incident where unknown numbers of smokers have smoked about 10 Russian aircraft, which is the biggest loss of air vehicles by a country known as Russia. So don't wait for it. Get to Saint Javelin, get yourself another t-shirt, support Ukraine, support the Ukrainian armed forces. Saint Javelin are the best. Go for it right now. Links in description. Now, Ukrainians have reached the second line of defense, and here I'm happy to switch back to the deep state map, because now we're talking about the second line of defense, or as some other analysts call it, the first line of defense. What you should be aware of is that this massive trench is right now the main Ukrainian target. They have penetrated the minefields, so now we should expect that they will start advancing a little bit more rapidly, and this is indeed what we're seeing. Ukraine wants to get as much surface area around this line as they can. So we might see right now some advances along this line and so on. Ukrainians are also trying to play off of their capture of Robotyne. And we know that there has been additional attacks towards Kopany, especially from the flank. And, which is most important, there was an action by Russians. They tried to counterattack Ukrainians into the direction of Robotyne from the direction of Verbove. And Ukrainians have actually stopped their counterattack. They were able to turn it around, and some of Ukrainian units have actually made it across the whole defense positions, and there are right now unconfirmed, this is just Russian side reporting, but again, they have been known to report in panic without further confirmations, but there have been Russian confirmations, Russian reportings that Ukrainians have crossed these two lines, and they're right now, as we are speaking right now, operating in the Verbove, already in a settlement, the main outskirts of settlement. For right now, I'm not yet ready to say that Ukrainians have indeed penetrated the front lines. Remember, the biggest problem is not defensive lines. The biggest problem is who are the people manning these front lines. And we got a little bit more knowledge about that as well. Ukrainians right now are concentrating their forces. There have been multiple reports, so I'm not giving anything out, in the Orychov direction. They have loosened some of their reinforcements in the Velika Novoselka direction. And there are two explanations potentially. Well, firstly, we all agree now that these will be the main areas, one or another. There are two main points of Ukrainian interest. Ukraine can either commit to the Orychov direction and try to put all of their eggs in one basket, which is something that a lot of the Western analysts are proposing. Or we also know Ukraine has been doing something lately, is that they have been doing these swings like a whack-a-mole. They start attacking on one direction and then they switch focus to another one. So potentially this is just a deflective maneuver, and instead they're expecting to increase their pressure just later on in the Velika Novosilka direction, when Russians are committed with their main forces, and we know that Russians are committing their main forces. There are many reports right now that Russians are pulling troops towards Orychov directions. They are one of the reasons, by the way, that Ukrainians were supposedly got into Verbove, is that Russians pulled units from defense and flanks of Verbove to try to prevent the main thrust towards the south around that. Moreover, we are now getting confirmations that Russians are moving there strategically. So they are moving the reserves that were dedicated to other parts of the front line and all of their offensive in the north. We now hear that they are moving reserves to Orychov axis. And right now, there are the forces of some VDV units that were earlier situated around Kremina area are right now being sent to the Orychov axis. This is major. This means Russia, we already talked about the fact that they're out of their operative reserves, that they still have some parts of their reserves as either parts of rotating units or units that are engaged in other front lines. So that situation that I explained a couple of weeks ago, that those scraps would need to be sent to the front lines to prevent Ukrainian breakthrough, are now being sent to the front line. We are seeing things developing exactly how it was expected. I know some of you expected that it's going to be second Kharkiv operation, but it's not. It's a lot more grindy. And Ukrainians are also, Budanov and other Ukrainian staff are saying, yes, the situation was not developing favorably on a favorable scenario, right? So favorable scenario, I think we all kind of agreed that it would be if Russian would start running, or some of the soldiers would be out of position, or anything else. This didn't happen. It turned like a proper fight, like bloody, gritty fight, where Ukrainians said, okay, if this is how we're doing it, we're adjusting. They've adjusted their approach. They've adjusted their strategy. They have adjusted their tactics. One of the major things is that US forces are very keen on critiquing Ukraine, at least the anonymous one from those Western medias, are fast to critique Ukrainian dedication, that they should just dedicate all of the forces, concentrate their forces, whereas the reality on the front line, as we see, is different, because this is now an open battlefield. The absolute abundance of drones, I hope abundance mean a lot, like, so there is a lot of drones, there is a lot of video cameras, live feeds, you name it. There are so much information about the front line, so as soon as the forces start concentrating, it becomes known in a matter of minutes for any kind of forces to respond and either dedicate artillery or even missile strikes. So concentration of forces wasn't really working. Instead, Ukraine broke their forces down into smaller units where they were not as easily targeted by artillery, and slowly they moved up through the defensive lines of Russians, while doing the most important thing, targeting Russian artillery, targeting Russian manpower, and getting through the defensive lines. One of the quite notable analysts recently said, like, oh, Russians just pulled out of Robotina. They were pulling out for a couple of days, actually. Well, duh, because Ukrainians made their life there insufferable. They've destroyed so much stuff there. They've dedicated a lot of resource to make sure that Russian positions in there are untenable. So right now, they didn't left there just because they didn't like the scenery or something, right? So in that sense, we see that Ukrainian strategy is working. As much as I know Russians are, unfortunately, they've muddied this phrase, but this is going according to plan. Ukrainians have, or let's not put the plan, the vision for Ukrainians. This is going for the vision of Ukrainians, and we're seeing it happening live. Right before your eyes, you will see as Russian gets more and more attrited, and then they will fall back and back and back, and Ukraine will break through these defensive lines. And as I stated, the main goal of Ukrainians would be Tokmak. Tokmak is a key, and Tokmak is more important than you can realize, because what Tokmak does, and that's why it is, a lot of the analysts are saying that battle for Tokmak is going to be probably the bloodiest, most fought through battle that we will ever see. Because Russians understand the value of Tokmak. They see that if Tokmak is taken, not only there is no more railway connection to the whole Kherson area, but it also allows Ukrainians to essentially later on clear out the flanks, and they will be able to then attack and at some point take out the Kerch Bridge. Kerch Bridge out, if Tokmak taken, then everything here is island. There is little to no connection of that. It is that important. But losing Tokmak for Russians is game ending. It's destined to, it's basically puts Crimea in a state of island. If Tokmak is taken, then the fate of Crimea will be just a matter of time. It's just that important. Russians know that. And because they know that, they will throw everything that they can to protect Tokmak. That is why I talked to you about the possible scenario that Ukraine will go through Velika Novosilka axis. Because at some point, Russians will start dedicating everything to Tokmak. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be brutal. And important thing for us is not to fall into despair and understand that this is the plan, this is the vision of Ukrainians, and they are doing the ultimate sacrifice to make sure they win. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. I will have to probably make more videos just because the situation is developing so fast. Remember, we still have a 100,000 giveaway, so I can give you some goodies. Join that one. Link again is going to be in description. Check out Saint Javelin. They're really cool. I love them. Check out our Discord if you want to follow map updates without waiting for a new video. Love you all. Slava Ukraini, guys. See you next time.